There are a couple of fascinating sections there in the epilogue after Job has spoken back to God and placed his hands over his mouth. That really couple of moments that really challenge our brains, and I think two moments that really make this book fascinating, particularly when it comes to interpreting it. Look at Job 42, verse 7. After Yahweh spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, "My wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends." I don't know where Elihu went. He wasn't at the beginning. He's not at the end. Apparently, he just pops in the middle. "My wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right as my servant Job has." Take a moment to let that verse sink in. You have not spoken of me what is right as my servant Job has. Now, remember what I said when we were looking at those friend speeches? They were the ones that were defending God. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? Make supplication to the Almighty. Go, repent, apologize to the Almighty. Lay yourself bare before the Almighty. And God says, you have not spoken of me what is right. Job has. But what did Job say? Well, Job is the one who says the wicked seem to be favored by God, and that God enjoys favoring the wicked and ignoring the righteous, and that God relentlessly pursues the innocent like a lion, and that God is arbitrary in bringing good, and God hates him, and God calls him an enemy, and God doesn't make sense or follow any of the expectations of judgment. Those are all things that Job said, and I have the verse references for you there so you know that I'm not making it up. But God says, you have not spoken of rightly of me as my servant Job has. Now, is God saying that he is all those things? Maybe, but I don't necessarily think it was the content that God was referring to there, but Job's willingness to be honest. Job had deep needs, and he powerfully expressed those needs, and those came out in statements that theologically challenged his friends, but also I think were exactly where he were. That quality of honesty that we saw in the Psalms, that quality of honesty we saw in Lamentations, we see that in Job all the way through, and that God respects it. I mean, now apparently you can't get too far with it, and God did, push Job down a little bit on that, but the I want to die and leave me alone, God, let me have some peace, look at me, I need a friend, why was I born, all those questions that Job is going through, that bare emotion that he's expressing is, I think, an important part of this, and I think probably what God's referring to when he tells the friends that they have to go and get Job to forgive them and get Job to pray for them before God will hear and forgive. So that's really kind of nice touch that the friends who were sitting in judgment over Job now have to make supplication to Job so that Job has to go to God and get their forgiveness for them, which is kind of neat. God gives back Job twice of all that he possessed before, so those numbers from chapter 1 are doubled here in chapter 42. His relatives and his friends return, offering comfort and gifts, the friends who earlier had abandoned him and the relatives who had abandoned him. He had 10 children with 3 beautiful daughters that actually get their own inheritance. Keziah and Jemima and Karen Hapuk. Keziah's name basically translates to cinnamon, and Jemima, well, she of course uses her inheritance to start that great lucrative syrup industry. That's a joke, just kidding on that. Karen Hapuk's name actually means eye makeup. Apparently she was so beautiful, she always looked like she was wearing eye makeup. I find it interesting that we know the 3 girls' names, but we don't know the boys' names. I've always assumed the boys are just butt ugly, because we're not going to talk about them, because the girls are just so, they actually get an inheritance. And Job lives an additional 140 years, which, according to the Jewish way of expressing that's an additional 3.5 generations. So he dies after living a very full life. So he is a full, basically Deuteronomic theology wins in the end, right? He was obedient and got rewarded. Maybe not. We'll talk about that in the interpreting video. But what's fascinating to me is this number that he was repaid back. He was repaid back twice. God gave him back twice his original possessions. And that number is fascinating. He could have given him back 7. He could have given him back 6. He could have given him back 2.5. He could have given him back 1.5. God could have paid back Job any number of multiples, but he ends up paying back twice. And that number twice ends up being very suspicious as a result of it, because in Exodus 22:7, twice is the amount that a thief is supposed to pay. Look at Exodus 22:7. When someone delivers to a neighbor money or goods for safekeeping, and they are stolen from that neighbor, then the thief, if caught, shall pay double. Double. That's the one punishment for a thief, is paying back double. God does pay back double. Now, is that a coincidence? Could absolutely be a coincidence. Am I calling God a thief? No, not exactly calling God a thief. But I am suggesting that God may be saying that what was taken from Job was taken wrongly. That there wasn't, as Job said, there was no basis for it being taken, and there was no basis for it being taken, and at the end of the day, it's not exactly an apology, but at least an acknowledgement that Job was correct and that what was taken from him was taken inappropriately. It's another one of those things that makes this book so fascinating and so difficult to interpret. But we're going to talk about the theological interpretations in the next video.